Hello and welcome to the Petticoated Swashbuckler. My name is Maren and today we are finishing up our big 60s project. Woo! So new century and the 1560s. Are the 1560s still the Middle Ages? Dubious. But I have done it and I want to share with you. And one of the reasons why I've done it is because I find it an interesting time period and I wanted to do it. Another reason I will get to at the end of this video. And a third reason is that if we're generous, my first look, the kind of peplos look, is from about the 560s, 660s, thereabouts. I'm now down the 1560s, so that's 1,000 years of clothing. And isn't that fascinating? Just the differences, how much has changed from like the first centuries towards the 1560s and the 1460s. It's just it just goes to show that the Middle Ages is not like one big monolith of history, but rather lots of little pieces of history. It's really nice. Lots of intricate stuff happening in those thousand years. So I'm going to do a little bit of historical context for you, like I've done with my previous videos. Then I'm going to show you a little bit of what I've made. I haven't done like a tutorial because a lot of what I made has been made very similarly to what I made in my last video and earlier videos. But I will show you a little bit and then I will show you what I've made. So let's get cracking. Now, when does the Middle Ages end? That depends a lot on who you ask. Some people would say 1453 with the invention of the printing press. And in a way that's true. That's a watershed moment where science and knowledge and philosophy becomes very kind of generally more available. It no longer takes years and years to copy out books by hand. Some people would say 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's the start of the early modern period, along with the start of massive genocide and colonialism and a lot of nasty things. And that is also a good point because it's also, along with all those nasty things, it's also a point in time when people realize there is more to be discovered. So before 1492, people in Europe had the general idea that most of the world has already been discovered. We know everything there is to know. Knowledge is complete. And then someone discovers that there's a huge thumping continent that no one knew about. Maybe there's more. Maybe we should look at the stars again. Maybe we should look at the world again, in nature. So it really gets science in the early modern period going by kind of triggering that curiosity a little bit. Some people say 1517, which is the start of the Reformation in Europe, when the church, the Catholic Church that had been fairly all-powerful in Western Europe at least, 1,500 years, had to deal with some contest, with some rivalry with Martin Luther and the Protestants, creating a sort of alternative Christianity. And in a way that's true, that's really important. That's absolutely a point in time when people go from thinking that the church is kind of all-powerful, all-knowing, to, wow, maybe the church isn't always right. Maybe we need to rethink a lot of our religious beliefs. So that's interesting. So there are many points, but most historians, I think, if not all, would agree that by 1560, the Middle Ages are gone. They are done. We are post-Reformation. Europe is divided. You have discovered America. And I use discovered here with like implied quotation marks. Discovered America. Discovered Reformation, discovered a lot of ancient philosophy that people can read more easily because we have printing presses. It's definitely the Renaissance. Renaissance, of course, just means rebirth. And they believe it was like the rebirth of classical knowledge. You can argue that the Renaissance has been going on for a few centuries already before the 1500s. There is something called there are a million Renaissances. The moment the Roman Empire goes under, people start to try and recreate it and have little renaissances. You have the Carolingian Renaissance during the reign of Charlemagne. You have the Alfredian Renaissance in Britain during under Alfred the Great, before the Norman invasion. You have the Italian Renaissance, which some people argue started in the 1100s. So there's like a lot of little renaissances, but it really kind of catapults it in the 1500s. Everything just there is new kinds of art. Instead of art being very stylized, very kind of codified, you want art to look more lifelike. Science gets a boost. This is the period of all the science celebrities, and art celebrities for that matter. Michelangelo, Da Vinci, Copernicus, Galilei, all of them exist in this period. I have already done something 1500s. Last year I made an Anne Boleyn costume, and that was based in the 1530s, so 30 years before what we're doing today. And I'm going to focus on the reign of her daughter. So we're still in Britain, we're still in the 1500s, but a little later. By his death in 1547, Henry VIII, who turned England from Catholic to Protestant to be able to marry Anne Boleyn, was basically Catholic again. In all but like, he still wanted to boss over the church instead of having the Pope boss over the church, but his faith was very much Catholic. He even almost like tried his last wife, Catherine Parr, for being a heretic because she was so Protestant and he really wasn't. However, his son Edward VI and his advisors, because he was like a child when his father died, they were very sternly Protestant and made England even more Protestant than it had been. Then when he died at the ripe old age of like 16, his older sister Mary I, who reigned from 1553 to 1558, she was very Catholic. So England kind of swivels back to being more Catholic again. And when she died and her sister Elizabeth came to the throne, England is back to Protestant again. So by the 1560s, it is Anne Boleyn's daughter Elizabeth who's on the throne. England is Protestant once more, and it's becoming a very interesting place, I think. Sometimes people are like, you're a historian, what historical period would you want to go back to? And I'm like, none of them, because I enjoy penicillin and the right to vote and education and painkillers and the pill. But if I had to choose somewhere to go for like a vacation, I think Elizabethan England, that's very high on the list. England was an interesting place, trying to kind of establish themselves on the oceans as a sort of navy powerhouse. Cloth trade became more and more important to England. England became a nation of seafarers. It's an island, so that makes sense. And the reason why cloth trade became more important is because they kind of imported a lot of people from Catholic countries who wanted to live in Protestant countries and who knew how to make good cloth. People from France, people from the Low Countries. Elizabeth was a very highly important ruler. She was not the first woman to rule alone. Her sister had that honour. And before her, Empress Matilda, kind of, in the 1100s. And early in her reign, she favoured a very monochrome style. Lots of black and white. Very demure, very mindful, very Protestant. Very Protestant. And then she becomes an absolute magpie and loves jewellery and fancy silken damasks. But that's as she grows older and kind of less self-confident in her own looks, I believe. She's still a woman in a man's world. It's not like because they had a queen, women were suddenly on equal footing with men. Absolutely not. However, we do have some sources of women trying to push boundaries and shocking their contemporaries by their manly ways. There were people who complained that these days it's impossible to see the difference between men and women because women dress like men. And what they mean by that is that the women are in full-length dresses, but they are using buttons to close their bodices. And buttons, as we all know, is strictly men only. Very masculine, no women ever wore buttons. And they're wearing hats. They're wearing very, very manly hats. So long skirts, but buttons and hats, impossible to tell the difference between men and women. There is also, in Elizabethan England, a slight urbanization of society. More people living in cities. You have the three estates of the Middle Ages, with like the nobility and the priesthood and everyone else's, the working class at the bottom, has already been faltering after the Black Death. In the Renaissance period, it kind of falls apart completely, because you have this second chunk of the working class, that is the bourgeoisie, the people who live in towns, merchants, traders, craftspeople, who strictly speaking belong to that bottom tier, but in many cases are more wealthy than the nobility. So where should you put them? It's difficult to know. So with that in mind, I wanted to do something inspired by these English merchant women, these bourgeoisie ladies, like this lady with a chatelaine, or these ladies that are merchant wives, or the gazillion other women who look like they make some money maybe on the cloth trade, and they like to spend it on their clothing. So I'm going to go through my clothes. For my underwear, I'm using what I have. I am using the petticoat from my bunad. It is not perfect. It is not a 1500s petticoat, but it does give the right silhouette. So that's nice. It gives a little oomph. Also, it's red, which is good. Petticoats in Elizabethan England should be red, because people believe that it's a warmer colour. So it keeps you warmer. I'm using the sleeves that I made for the 1460s outfit. I'm using the shift that I also wore for the 1460s outfit, which is actually the shift I made for Anne Boleyn. So it's already 1500s, kind of. I'm using the Anne Boleyn linen hosen. I'm using some red leather garters from my medieval stash. And I'm using my Anne Boleyn kirtle, just without the faux part and the trim along the front. I could keep some of it, or I could like add some ribbon trim or something, but I wanted to show a little bit of a plainer silhouette. I mean, for this period, for the 1560s, you could do a petticoat and bodice. We have a petticoat, and then you have like separate bodice, corset kind of situation. But kirtle is still completely fine, especially for low down the social scale. So I'm just going with my kirtle. Now, on to what's new with my outfit. First of all, is this partlet. To achieve the fashionable neckline and to cover the bosom, and also for a hint of that super popular 1560s thing, the ruff. Coming in from the continent in the 1560s, taking off, becoming huge, figuratively and literally. The ruff is like the peak of Elizabethan fashion. It could be thick wool. Mine is a linen with a tiny little ruff. It's very, very fashionable. I also made a cap with a forehead cloth. As you can see, the shape of this cap has changed quite a lot from the 1530s cap, so I really need a new one. I have made a hat, as you can see, very manly. You could hardly tell I was a woman, could you? And I have made a gown. I've got these puffed sleeves. They are very fashionable, and there's a lot of black on black velvet, black velvet on black wool. That was also very, very fashionable. And it's time to show you some of my outfits. Now for the working woman outfit, I'm wearing the white linen shift, the white linen hosen and garters, my red petticoat, my white kirtle and apron, a forehead cloth and cap, and the little partlet. Ruffs were actually fashion that was available for fairly low down the social scale, because the servant girls who learned how to make them and how to set them could afford a little bit of linen to make their own. So that's quite cool. Now the city woman also wears her sleeves and her gown and her hat. Very fashionable. And with that, we're done with our 60s project. The silly, is that even a word? The very silly, ambitious project that I started, that I've been thinking about for years, and I'm so happy to have done it. I hope you enjoyed it. We're done just in time for Christmas. Next episode is a special Christmas surprise for you, and then after Christmas we're gonna have a look at the last 60s that I haven't got in my collection, and I've got to catch them all. But I'll see you again in a couple of weeks for a little Christmas special. Until then, bye!